Hey, G and Tier. You
Yes.
distracted me, Daniel. You fucking got
I
me
didn't
again.
do anything. I didn't do anything.
Let's have that little Daniel chuckle shit.
I
Hey, fellow G and Tiers, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. All right, so we're back. We had started really talking about practicalities of Jung. This was based on sort of a thought from our Daniel, who said, "Hey, let's look at some of the practical side of this. What exactly would you like practically do if you wanted to try to have some of these experiences that Jung is referencing?" And so we got to two of his ideas. One is called active imagination, which is a kind of an inner journeying thing, where you imagine yourself kind of going into your own inner world. It's a visualization thing. I think, like we were talking about last time, Daniel, he would sometimes visualize like going into a cave or something, like going under the ground, right? And then you'll see what you'll see, but hopefully you'll meet some figures. For Jung, this would be inner archetypes. And then you can chat with them and see what they have to say and have your experience of this. And this is this idea of finding your way into Jung's notion of this thing called the collective unconscious, right? You find yourself into this space. So that's the active imagination thing. And we kind of talked about how to do that a little bit. And then we got to the point where we talked about some of the effects of this. And certainly one of the things that Jung believes happens is that the external world will start to respond to you too. This is really interesting in him. As you connect to these archetypes internally, you'll kind of connect to them externally too. For Jung, this is kind of a, I guess a kind of a scientific mystery, an empirical mystery that this happens, that as you connect to the deeper parts inside yourself, those same kinds of things will respond in the external world. So he calls this a kind of a synchronicity. What you find, what you tap into inside yourself will be mirrored by the external environment, which raises a huge question of like, what the hell exactly is going on in this crazy place we call the universe to make this happen. But, it's certainly something that he thinks is very real. And we've had a bunch of episodes around this where we've talked about this issue. And you and I, Daniel, we both think this is a thing too, right? As you tap into deeper parts of yourself, the universe will respond for whatever that means, right? That's why he sometimes uses this phrase objective psyche to talk about this part internally as well as externally, because it's a little bit something beyond yourself. It's really not just you anymore, because the external world starts to respond too. So, I mean, that's interesting, and almost, okay. So we talked about that a lot. And this idea of synchronistic phenomenon will start to appear. And that got us to talking about one of his big ideas, which is this thing called 7 Sermons to the Dead, which is just an illustration of this happening in his own life. So that's where we were planning on like picking up, if you're following these episodes along. And so we're on 7 Sermons to the Dead. This was kind of a piece of, I don't know if you're familiar with this thing. Are you familiar with this thing, Daniel? Have you heard this?
I'm not, no.
Okay. We're not going to do a whole thing about it. We were talking a little bit off mic, which is how you messed my shit up coming into this intro, which I really can't blame you.
No.
To blame myself. I choked in the intro. But you did have that little Daniel smile, and it throws me. You know what I mean? That magnetic Daniel smile. How can someone like you get a little tongue-tied? I'm sure the listeners and the viewers all know that the Daniel Riz, you can't do anything about that.
Right, yeah.
It's
I'm a wizard.
Yeah. So 7 Sermons to the Dead. So what happened was, it's a piece of like sort of channeled writing almost. What you might call automatic writing or channeled writing. And at the time that it got inspired, he was, I should say, even within his whole family, weird stuff started to happen, these kinds of synchronistic phenomenon. So it's kind of giving an example, like he was tapping into these things inside of himself, and then weird things started to happen within his environment. And then he just all of a sudden started like having this inspired channeled writing thing, which ends up being this piece. So as far as at the time, his kids saw some ghosts that were like floating around the place, and they started saying there's weird stuff happening. I think his daughter saw some female figure walking. So it was ghost-like things, spirits. And then his daughter had her blanket snatched off the bed, but it wasn't obvious who did it. So strange things were happening. His son drew pictures which referenced Jung's inner visions that he was having on his own, but he had never told the family about it. So his son was drawing similar pictures, of things that he would have really no way of knowing. Jung was exploring these images inside himself. And there's, some examples of this. Finally, I guess the doorbell rang and no one was there. And there were some knocks and things, and it was very synchronistically freaky. And then Jung felt this inspiration and he started doing this automatic writing. I think it was like almost immediately after the doorbell started to ring. And he heard this sort of word start to appear in his mind, which went, we have come back from Jerusalem where we have found not what we sought. And so it's a kind of a provocative phrase. It's like, and I think for him, he was like, I wouldn't come up with a phrase like this. It's so odd, right? We have come back from Jerusalem where we found not what we sought. So in some ways, it looks like it's part of Jung's crisis he went through, or his transformation he went through, where he was moving away from sort of more aspects of his Christian background, or his more straight Judeo-Christian background. There are probably things that were a little bit more unorthodox Christianities, like Gnostic Christianities and things like that. And in this automatic writing that he did, he eventually attributed it to a kind of a Gnostic sage from Alexandria, which was sort of like a Gnostic stronghold back 200 AD or something like that. So he just started feeling like he was channeling this writing. And I think when people have looked at it, it doesn't look like he did it with calligraphy pen. So he did it calligraphically. And I mean, when people have talked about it, that I've listened to people kind of comment on this, it doesn't really look like his own handwriting. It certainly seems different somehow, Now, again, whatever that means, whether he had actually channeled these figures who, of the synchronistic thing, or he was tapping some part inside himself, or he had hit some archetypal world, we can discuss, right? But in any case, this did happen. And so this was sort of a kind of a Gnostic channeling experience for him. He felt like he was probably channeling some kind of Gnostic sage. But I think even for him, he wasn't like, it's not obvious how he wanted to frame it for himself. He wasn't sure if he was thinking something Gnostically inside of himself that he had found, or whether he was doing something external. So obviously he's open to these different possible explanations around this. So I can talk about the central message in the thing, but do you have anything you want to say about this first, Daniel, about the writing or anything? Okay. Well, it builds to something that I kind of knew we were going to end up talking about. From the very moment that this idea of this whole little series of experiential episodes came up. So the central message of the 7 Sermons to the Dead, without doing all of it, is a description that one has to differentiate oneself from the mass. So the weird part, which I didn't expect last time we recorded on this, Daniel, was that I think we had even more spontaneous agreement about this than maybe what I anticipated going in. That, there's a certain question of like separating oneself from the mundane. And we ended up talking a lot less time we recorded about mundane appearances and mundane conceptions. That's the way I would put it. You were putting it in your own way too.
Right.
But that, is a central message of this whole work. So he says this has to happen to achieve one's own individuality. And Jung is big into this idea of what's called individuation, where people kind of establish their own core identity for themselves. There's kind of two sides to it when he talks about it. One side is to differentiate yourself from sort of the social world. And that's always a big deal for me. So that really appeals to me in Jung, that really resonates with me in Jung. But he also says you have to kind of differentiate your own psyche so you're not dominated by your own internal stuff. Whether it's, I guess, your own personal unconscious things, things from your own history and your own past, or whether it's things that are maybe more within this collective unconscious, that you're not dominated by your archetypes somehow. You've kind of lived within that world, but you're not dominated by them. You can move within all these spaces and still feel your own individual freedom or something like that. So that's individuation. It seems to be he was coming up with this idea as he was going through these experiences, and it just kept kind of building for him. But the idea is that you want to achieve your own individuality. And then he has some quotes from here. I pulled some quotes from 7 Sermons to the Dead to kind of illustrate the point. And it's written in a very high style. The natural striving of the creature goeth toward distinctiveness, fightest against primeval, perilous, sameness. Let me try that one again.
Yeah.
The natural striving of the creature goeth toward distinctiveness, and fightest against primeval, perilous sameness. So he's talking about, I think, what you see in the Taoists a lot, this idea, like, to be an individual person, you have to be able to differentiate yourself from the crowd, from the mass, and what you might say the mundane conceptions and appearances of the world you're surrounded by. But it's written in this fancy style. Now, one of the things that, I was doing all these researches on Jung as we were prepping these episodes and thinking about writing him, and he does say this interesting thing. He says, when you get in touch with archetypal things, they talk in a very like high style, or they talk in a very high poetry. Sometimes it might even sound a little bit like this could sound a little pretentious even, or something, right? Or bombastic maybe. But they tend to talk in this very elevated language, right? And so I think that I think there's a truth in that, right? When you find the archetypes, they hit kind of strong and they have powerful personalities and they talk strong. So I think he felt like he probably hit something here, but it also clued him into the idea that the archetypes tend to talk in this very strong, powerful, assertive, and elevated way. Does that make sense to you too?
Yeah, I'm thinking about somebody who is listening, and thank you to all of the listeners who have sent us screenshots of their Spotify Wrapped for 2023 that have our podcast in the top 5. Definitely appreciate the love. It's been more than a couple, so we appreciate that.
It's always an adventure because there's a million podcasts out there. I was watching some show yesterday and they had one of the characters was asking, who's that? And then the other character said, oh, I think she has a podcast. And then the one guy said, oh yeah, everybody does. Doesn't everybody? Everybody and their brother has a podcast, and their sister and their cousin and their aunt and everybody.
That's
But
right. That's right.
We're still fighting it out here.
We're still battling it. So
the natural
I'm thinking,
striving of the creature goeth toward distinctiveness.
There we go. So I'm thinking of
against primeval perilous.
So I'm thinking of an audience member who is listening to this, and trying to understand. They're interested in what we're saying. They're interested in psychology and in their own development, salvation, if you will, right? Understanding psychologically, energetically, spiritually, whatever. Probably people have a varied level of meditative practice, of insight and things like this. And so may not be familiar with the concepts of archetypes, number one, which we've covered before, but that's okay. And if they are remotely familiar,
we kind of done that a lot, so I didn't bother going through
we have no. I'm not saying you have to. I'm just covering the bases, And if they have heard it before, maybe it doesn't resonate with their own experience because they've heard it, but they may not understand what it is that they're experiencing. Do you know what I'm saying? And that even if they did experience it, maybe it was brief, or they didn't get a chance to have like dialogue with something that would, you know what I'm saying? That would give them enough opportunity to say yes or no. This, I can understand that higher falutin language, if you will, as to be indicative of that kind of archetype. So I just wanted to touch on that part, just before we.
Well, I have to say for myself, my archetypes in my, what I would feel it would be my experiences of them don't talk like they're from medieval times or something like that.
Sure.
But I don't think they have to.
Right.
I'll try to share an experience of this maybe a little bit later on.
Yeah.
That maybe I had more recently.
I could say two things. One, there's some things I can't admit publicly yet, but
let me say this real quick while you're gathering your thoughts. To me, one of the things about it is that they speak powerfully.
Yes,
they speak powerfully. So whether or not they're going to sound like they're from like Robin Hood, Nottingham Forest, or whatever it is, whatever this language is, I wouldn't hear that in my head, or I wouldn't have that from the archetypal experience that I had. But they speak powerfully, and maybe part of the experience is that you need to have the idea that this could be happening in your private moments when you like kind of tap into your own inner world and you hear like very strong opinions about things,
Right.
that might be the moment where you're actually hitting this, because they talk powerfully and they have very definitive opinions. So maybe that helps on some level. I didn't mean to talk over you, Daniel. Sorry about that. I just was going to get that little piece out.
You're good.
I didn't kill your flow too much.
So a couple things come up. Number one is this idea of channeling, right? We talked about automatic writing, right? From what I understand, automatic writing is kind of like you can basically close your eyes and let your hand go, you know?
And I have to say, I haven't been an automatic writing person, so I can't talk from personal experience about this.
I'm one person. I've talked to somebody who's done it.
Okay.
So yeah. Or they also call it astral stenography. They can let their hand go, or what they will do is they'll close their eyes and they'll see what to write.
Okay.
They'll see it. It just kind of like pops up. I don't know how it happens, but it's.
I just say for this young thing, I don't know the details of how that was for him.
Right.
And I've done a decent amount of research on this, listening to the MDR and listening to people talk about it. I could look maybe for next week's episode, but I don't know if there's no description of this except the fact that he produced this work.
Right. So that's those are the two things that I've been familiar with. In terms of allowing things to kind of come through you and then come out. And then the two aspects of the channeling and the language. One, again, somebody who I know very close to me, related in a very particular kind of a way. Sorry to be so vague, but it is what it is. But I could verify that this person exists. He definitely had varied language. And I have tapes of this person who worked as a medium for the better part of a decade, maybe 12 years to 11 years. And the speech pattern would change anytime and every time that he changed whoever he was working with. You know what I'm saying? And the language often sounded like a lot of yees and nayeth and say it, you know what I'm saying? Like that.
Okay, so it's a little bit like what Jung is doing here.
Yeah, that's how it was for him. Now, I could say for myself, when I have felt inspired from a very particular place, the shift in language, like you had mentioned, is very powerful. But it's also, and it's going to sound poor, but it's clearly ambiguous.
Okay. Yeah.
Because from what I understand, and I have taken this from when I was very high, that like at those moments, I'm aware that I'm operating in two very distinct spaces. One that's a field of potentiality, essentially, and that forms are appearing and not appearing simultaneously, and I'm describing a meditation. And on the other side is this reality that we're totally in right now, but one is layered over the other one, or I'm seeing through one, depending on how you want to label that. And that like I'm describing what I'm seeing as it is, but as it is happening simultaneously in both places at the same time. So it's clear, but it's ambiguous enough that the person can interpret the language that I have for themselves without being so taken by the hand down the road.
You're talking about like maybe like channeling for another person or something, right?
Yeah. Yes. But whether it's for somebody else or via my own archetypes coming out, I don't know the difference because I'm not that, I'm a nuanced person. I'm a subtle guy, but I don't have stats, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm listening. Yeah.
Yeah, no. And so that's the only thing I could say is that there's a language shift. And that's the point that I kind of wanted to make for people who may have more or less familiarity with these types of states, is that the language does change. It may not be like the way that he said it, but there is a deeper meaning to it. And it connects with what we talked about last week about breaking through the constant stream of chitter chatter in the mind and finding the deeper place of reflection. That language, however it comes out, seems to kind of erupt, actually. Like it sort of elevates from somewhere. Not quite sure where, but it comes from somewhere.
Yeah, it's interesting for me. All I can do is like share my own experience of what's felt like this to me, which is that to the extent that I felt like I've tapped into these archetypal things, they've just had really strong personalities. So I haven't felt them to be ambiguous. that doesn't mean that they may not be for somebody else or whatever.
Sure.
But for me, it sort of felt a little bit more like what Jung is talking about, where they're like pretty strongly opinionated and they
Yeah.
have pretty strong things to say that are like, okay, here it is. You know, like if you were talking to Mars, he'd probably have a pretty strong opinion of stuff, you know? So it's probably been a little bit more like that for me, which I guess matches what Jung is describing. I hadn't paid attention to this. I think the first time I read his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, maybe even the second, but this last time, this really jumped out at me. And the strength of the language really hit me. And I was like, yeah, that does match my experience with this probably. So I don't know what that means. You know what I mean? Different strokes for different folks.
Mm-hmm.
It is what it is. But that did resonate with me, that it was like very strong. Mm. Now, I don't know what this means because he credits this to some Gnostic sage that he's identifying, at the time in Alexandria. So whether or not he's like, he's matching that quality of those ideas and opinions.
Right.
But he definitely has this notion of like, which I think is such a big theme in the show, and it just popped up again, where he's definitely like, I mean, this wasn't set up or anything. I was just like, oh, 7 sermons to the dead. It's the thing to talk about. And it comes back to this point, which is, I mean, obviously such a big deal for me. But, he talks, anyway, for people who've listened to more than a few episodes of this. But, he says these really strong things about this, that there's a real problem of differentiating the individual person. So the other big quote he has here with a bunch of ye's and so on, ye all become equal, and thus is your nature maimed. So it like destroys and maims your inner nature by becoming equal. So he's saying this thing very definitively. And the voices seem pretty strong. Whether at some point we do an episode on 7 sermons of the dead, we were kind of talking about beforehand, we'll figure out what we want to do in different things going forward. But yeah, the point, the opinions seem pretty strong.
Right.
And it struck me like from the shower curtain of wisdom across the hall. One of my quotes on there is, kind of very Taoist, and it's really from Krishnamurti. But he says something like, nature is busy creating absolutely unique individuals, whereas culture has invented a single mode to which all must conform. It is grotesque. That seems to be the underlying vantage point of like 7 sermons, 7 sermons to the dead. It seems to be what they're saying. Which I wanted to hook that back up to this whole experience of experiential stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, it is interesting, like it's a very strong set of opinions. I don't know how it felt for him at the time. I mean, he's an interesting person in that, you sort of know him. There's like Jung, as you like to say, Daniel. Jung never gets old. He's always young at heart. Ha! And then it goes on, right? And you get kind of middle-aged Jung, and like some of the stuff, like where we're doing Book of Job, he's writing that in his 70s.
Right.
That's old Jung, right? But I mean, I don't know where he was at in his whole process of deciding what he thought about life when this thing was happening for him. But obviously, some really strong opinions came through.
Yeah.
Right. And it had a lot to do with, I mean, what probably for him ultimately became a separating from, you might say, the God of his fathers or something like that. And his God, he broke with this thing very massively. So, but the opinions came out pretty strong.
Right.
Yeah. Which, I mean, I wanted to talk about that idea a little bit, but let me throw it back to you. Do you have more stuff you want to say about this? I mean, it's interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this goes along with.
I would imagine if you're channeling for somebody else, though, that would be a little bit more like, okay, I'm going to present you an image and that will mean something to you. Because you've talked about that with patients and things. But that might not be an archetype. That's tapping into something about that person and their life and their history. It's not like tapping into Venus or Aphrodite or, some other archetypal, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think
it might be a different, like different energetic process, different experience going on, right?
Yeah, I think when we moved,
you had the case study with the woman where you saw the car or something.
Oh yeah,
ultimately it had to do with the woman's mother who was a victim of sexual violence that might have actually got.
Yeah,
so that might be more like you have a flash and an image and an insight or something, but that might not be an archetype exactly. Correct. It might be something else,
Yeah, the question I have, and as I've studied archetypes with different people, is that like, are they universal forces that exist inside and outside of us? right, at the same time? And if the answer is yes, then do they have any sort of like elemental form or repetitive type of experience, as the experiencer? You know what I'm saying? And I don't know. I don't have an answer. I mean, I know what Carl Jung talks about it, and all these like depth psychology and these folks say
Like
about it.
that they're like vague enough where they're going to look different ways for different people and different causes and so on, right? That's his idea.
Yeah, and that's my idea. And then based on that, like what you're shown from that, like it might be different per person.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. Yeah.
And so like what comes through, could it be it was that image that I had of this, woman being assaulted, which was a truism that happened in her life.
Yeah.
But my question then is, yes, it's about, is this it's not, it was not about, is this true or not true? Because I try my best to detach myself from those kinds of viewpoints, because then I'll start judging right away and be like, oh my God, look at me, I could see the past or the future, whatever. But in the context of this conversation, I begin to wonder where it came from.
That particular thing?
Yeah, that particular thing, or things like that in general.
If you're a Buddhist philosopher, they have this idea they call, oh man, is it disintegratedness? I think is the word they use. But it's kind of like Gelik Rinpoche, which kind of talk about this as like maybe like quantum information. All the events, it's karma. But the events that happened are like the energetic imprints are out there, like in the universe around us, in nature around us. And that's true in physics. That's how you read shit that happened in the past, right?
Sure.
Those events leave traces that you can then pick up on,
right,
in the physical world around you. Otherwise, you wouldn't even know there's a Big Bang. You have to see the impacts of that to infer it back, right?
Is there a Big Bang?
Well, now that's getting doubted. But like you picked up on something, right? There's background radiation and all this shit. Like, some star blew up a while ago, but that information is still hurtling through space.
Right.
The information's out there.
I guess
it's concretely there. Like that car, that backseat of that car isn't there, but somewhere, because that information, this is information stuff, right?
Yeah.
Age of information now, right? But that information is out there. And you go to a subtle place and you have a talent and ability, you tap into that shit, right? Yeah. And that would be the Buddhist explanation for it, because it's still out there as like energetic imprints,
right?
Yeah. Not even necessarily even where they're going to be localizable in space. Not to go all, what is it, Ant-Man, Quantum Mania?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, right.
Some possibly crappy movie we were talking about before last time we recorded. I mean, who knows where it is, right? But it's out there. I mean, that's the basic kind of Buddhist slant. It's kind of an obscure Buddhist theory, but disintegratedness.
Yeah, and they also, I think this is something they call this, and I don't know much about it. I don't even know if I believe in it. They call it the Akashic records. Anything that's ever happened is stored somewhere in some filing cabinet in the stars. You know what I'm saying? And there's an old library.
It could sound like that's a little bit maybe why I like the Buddhist stuff a little bit more, because it's usually said a little bit more dry.
Right.
Which might suit my personality. I don't want to hear about like a filing cabinet the angels are going through.
Yeah.
I'm against it. I mean, it's cool. And if you like that kind of stuff, it's
right. Yeah. Fun. I mean, it's a similar concept.
That imagery doesn't speak to me the same way. I'm a little bit maybe more like a physicsy minded person.
Yeah.
I like the idea of like, there's information that disintegrated and it's out there though. The actual objects are gone, but the imprints of the information are there. Right. I feel more comfortable with that.
Yeah, I think anytime I've
heard, different strokes for different folks.
I think anytime I've ever heard about it, it's described to me like a large filing cabinet. You know what I'm saying, or like some kind of like and people who they read it. They go, oh, I'm gonna open the Akashic records, this book.
It's like going through the filing cabinet.
Chapter 7. Line 13A. You pooed on your pants when you were 9.
And it felt very awkward for you.
Yeah, exactly. And you carry that shame with you today.
I mean, it's always like that weird dance, because I mean, it's like sometimes I'll get people will send me things. I'm like, well, this is really new age.
Right.
you know, and I'll be a little cringy because I'm really
Yes.
more old age.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
than
Yeah.
new
Yeah. Yeah.
age. But this is like, we've had this before. I don't want to judge the new agey people. We
No.
love you. I love you, new agey people.
Well, you know what it is?
But it's just different. It's different. It's different aesthetics almost, right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
different language, and it's how it hits the person. And you know,
Yeah.
like I mentioned earlier, it's the way in which you can lead somebody down a pathway without giving them the exact description of the thing, so that they can fill it in for themselves and it'll resonate deeper for them.
The other thing about this, I think, like, in my feeling of this, I don't think knowing about personal karma is an archetype. I don't think that's the same thing. Just my own 2 cents.
Okay.
And I don't think that, like, even like feeling like elemental energies, like feeling wood or fire or metal, if you're doing like Chinese cultural things, or feeling, you know, earth and water and fire and consciousness and space and all these things, if you're being a little bit more Indian about it, I don't think those are archetypes either. That doesn't seem to be what Jung is talking about either. He's not talking about like, I felt an energetic field. I think those are energetic fields. They might even be more primary on some level, right, than what he's talking about. So
Yeah.
I have got comfortable with just seeing those as not kind of being the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, there would definitely be people who I've, you know, studied with who would disagree, but that's the beauty of.
That's cool. I like it. I know who you're talking about, and I probably disagree with them.
Right. Eric's like, that's fine.
Okay.
I already disagree with their disagreement, so no problem.
I mean, I already knew I disagreed with them. That's totally fine.
Yeah.
That's totally fine. But it doesn't certainly seem what Jung is talking about. He doesn't talk about like, okay, I felt this force field of water energy around me.
Right.
And it's not like he doesn't know that stuff. He knows that stuff.
Yeah.
And from my own subjective experience, I don't feel that's the same thing. To feel a field of water energy, I don't think that's the same as like feeling Tara's presence in your life. I don't think that's the same from my perspective on it.
Sure.
You know, so my thing probably maybe a little bit more agrees with like what Jung is talking about. But I mean, again, I wouldn't fight a duel over it or anything.
Sure. Yeah.
I just, you know, I kind of like, I know how people talk about it, and I'm like, that isn't how I don't think that's what Jung means.
Right.
And I don't think that that's the experience he's describing. He's describing something that's much more of an individualized entity that probably has all the phases in it or something. It's not just some water, you know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, I wouldn't fight about it or anything, obviously. None of this stuff is worth fighting about. Do you have an opinion about it?
Do I have an opinion about it? Not necessarily. I mean, I feel like regardless of the medium to which you want to understand things that are difficult to describe via language, you know, that if you believe them to be universally present, you know, to me, then that's kind of an archetype, you know?
Yeah.
And so
let's go through. We're going to talk about Jung's experiences, and then you could see like what you think about it as we even go through the details of his. I mean, we might be using the same word for 2 different kinds of things, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like someone's using the word a little bit bigger. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah. And so if somebody feels that, like, you know, aspects of joy and community and, you know, I don't know, spreading of ideas is important for them, and that's how they experience their Shen in their life, which is a fire element type thing, then that archetype is putting influence on their life. Can I say that the fire element has an archetype per se? I don't know, but those two seem like they fit, but it doesn't. I don't need to. For me, I don't personally need to have everything perfect box. This is this is this, so therefore it's that, and now I can tuck it away. Like, I don't. It doesn't. You know.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's probably more experiential.
Yeah.
To the extent that I've meditated on these elements and phases.
Yep.
That we would do, because the basic discussion is like, is the water phase in Chinese medicine or the water element in Buddhist culture or something, is that an archetype? You know? And for me, like, obviously, like you and I both have done this. I've done those meditations on those things. I felt like I have some experience with it, but like, I don't think that's an archetype like the way Jung is talking.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean somebody's right or wrong. It's just, you know, however you're using the language or whatever. That's no big one. Yeah.
So Eric, takeaways from this kind of 7 sermons to the dead.
Well, I guess like you want to end it here and we're going to pick up on the next episode, right?
Yeah. So take away
Okay, so
from
this
this.
would be probably like a little cliffhanger into the next episode. I think it ending with this very strong statement from this archetypal source will probably get us into what our next conversation, which will be something about like, we'll move on to talking about a little bit back to our old friend Job
Mm,
and the answer to Job and how this connects to this story, because it's something that I wanted to try to tie together. But otherwise, I guess we'd say the conclusion is kind of a bridge between the two, because we got to the idea of like active imagination, this trying to search for these inner figures,
mm,
and it goes through and it kind of maybe opens a door to this inner outer connection, right?
yeah.
And here's a big example of it, right? That once this starts happening, maybe these external things in the world start to respond. And here's a very concrete example of it, right?
Yeah.
That's what it sort of means for me. Do you have some other takeaway on that? I'm certainly, however you want to frame that too, right?
No, I think that's right. I mean, and we've kind of talked about this, off and on, maybe not in such specific ways besides last week, but that like as you work on and change your own inner world, the outer world around you will eventually start to reflect that. So if you're meditating or meditating on joy, or you're meditating on gratitude, or you're doing some kind of qigong practice where you laugh a lot, you're going to be more prone to seeing the world a little bit more giving, a little bit more joyous, a little bit more open,
I think that's definitely true, right?
and
I mean,
so, and that
yeah.
that being on a psychological level, and if you're doing, or energetic, however you want to describe it, it doesn't matter. But I think the point being is that like there is there is a reality in which you are more open to synchronistic external experiences based on internal change, internal
I
work.
guess I've gone back and forth on this, but I definitely go through these windows of time where I'm like, the universe is talking.
Yeah.
It's talking. And then there's an old line from one of the old Smith songs back in the day: nature is a language, can't you read?
Mm,
And it's a great line. Um, and I felt like, okay, yeah, sometimes I feel like I might lose my sense of this at times. But in these moments where there's intense emotions involved or intense archetypal activity involved,
yeah.
um, then you're like, oh yeah, this is like, it happens in love, right?
Yes.
And Jung points that out, but it happens in other strong inner experiences, like these visionary journeying experiences. And then the
Yeah.
universe will be talking like pretty explicitly. And I don't know why this is the case in me. Sometimes I lose my sense of that. And other times I really have it very strongly. And I would probably blame it on me more than the universe.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the universe isn't talking. It's like I'm not recognizing that nature's a language and I'm not seeing it right.
Yeah.
I'm not hearing it. But like in those moments where this happens, you're like, it is like a kind of a goddamn, the universe is talking. It's like, and sometimes it's screaming, to be heard. It's strange experience, right? But you're like, no,
Yeah.
this universe is talking for sure. It's really like trying to like bang some trash can lids together and it's saying stuff.
Yeah.
Whether or not you hear it, it'll depend, but it's definitely talking. A lot of times people won't pay attention. And I guess the critique in Jung is a lot of times the reason people won't pay attention is they're so wrapped up in their own kind of mundane ideas about things.
Right.
So this archetypal thing blows through and says, hey, don't be a creature that goeth towards non-distinctiveness.
Mm,
Fight this against perilous sameness. And don't let your inner nature be maimed, because that'll cut you off. I mean, that's what I take away from it. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
yeah. I think I have a
It's
story.
strong. I mean, it's like, and that's, I guess, the reason why it is. It's strong experience. It's like, and there's a range of these things, meditatively and otherwise. But this is a very probably particular set of experiences where the universe talks loud. Yeah.
Yeah. There was I taught a shamanic course, I think January of 20. So before all the good stuff happened,
Yeah. Yeah.
and one of the students was he's like a woodworker, kind of a construction guy,
Mhm.
and I had a couple gals in the class, and in one of the classes I said, okay, we're going to go and see if we can meet some kind of helper spirit, we'll call it, you know. And he ended up meeting a jaguar.
Oh, I think I remember you talking about this, but go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, and this jaguar was and I'm sure he's shared this a lot, so I'm not sharing anything, you know, that's
You might
too.
have talked about this in a different episode, but yeah, tell it again because it's a good one, I think. If I remember
Yeah. And so he had this interaction with this jaguar that was very sensual, actually. Like he felt like,
that part I don't remember.
yeah, like there was like sexual things happening, and he was kind of like, I don't know, okay, you know.
Uh-huh.
And so at this time, you know, previous to the class, maybe a few months earlier than that, he ended up having a little bit of a house fire, and they had to move their stuff into storage while the, you know, place was being taken care of by the insurance. And so after class, maybe the next day after, but during the week, he went to the storage facility, and there was a Polish gentleman from Poland, thick accent, who had some stuff in the locker or in the whatever facility adjacent to his, and this guy's truck, this big, like, I don't know, work kind of van, was in the way of his unit. And so he said, hey, can you move your van? And the guy said, yeah, I'll get to it in a little bit. And so my friend went to go get some carts and whatever. And as he's coming back, the guy came up to him and said, hey, my friend said, yeah. And he's never really had conversation with this guy other than, can you move your van?
Yeah.
He goes, do you want a Jaguar? And my friend's like, what do you mean, do I want a Jaguar? He's like, yeah, do you want a Jaguar? He's like, what are you saying? He goes, hold on, I show you. And so the guy wheels around this taxidermy female jaguar, full life. It's real, you know? He's like, he goes, I don't have any room for it anymore. I'm moving. I can't take it with me. I can't sell it because it's illegal, but I can give it to you if you want it. He's like, and you're a big guy, drive a truck. I'm assuming you're a hunter. And my friend's like, I don't even own a gun, you know, like I'm not like that. He's like, but
this was after the shamanic event, right? This is all
about within about 48 hours.
See, that's fucking synchronicity.
And there it is. And he still has it at his house today. But the reason why I was reminded of it is because of the last point that you made. And yeah, the story in itself is wild. And during the class, I was like, dude, that's crazy. You know, like you can't make that shit up. But now that's, you know, that's about
Some
almost
random Polish guy with the locker next door gives you a giant stuffed jaguar.
Yeah.
You find like your inner animus, or inner anima, I should say, your feminine jaguar inside. Your inner Sophia appears as a jaguar.
Yeah. And so he's a woodworker, and you know, his townhome is kind of cool, got all kinds of cool designs, and he's got this jaguar like basically in his stairway, just like hanging over the thing. I don't know. It's heavy. I don't know how he got it to be hoisted up like this. But you were saying that like the kind of external synchronicities function as a reminder to what's going on the inside. And I saw it and it was cool. And we reminisced just for a moment about when that happened. But I don't actually know if he takes the time to remind himself of the inner nature of that feminine deity who manifested as a jaguar for him at that particular time.
Well, I could definitely say, and yeah, I don't know how we're going to handle this. Maybe this is a recording for the day, and then we like pick up on this next time.
Yeah.
I don't know how you.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about it is like obviously Jung is fascinated by this shit that this happens, right? Yeah. Like he had a patient who was having a dream where there was a scarab in the dream, like one of these beetles, you know?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden there was like a flutter at the door, of the window, I should say, of the treatment room. So he walked over to the treatment room, was like, what's going on? He opens the door and this giant beetle flies in.
Huh.
He was like, what the fuck? You know, I'm sure inside of himself. Because this woman just had this dream about this scarab. And of course, we're not going to see a scarab here, but like this weird beetle that no one would ever see in the area. It's like they were flying everywhere. This weird bug flies in, this giant scarab. And so these are the experiences he's talking about, like exactly what you're talking about with the stuffed jaguar. This kind of stuff happens, right?
Yeah.
And this, you know, makes up this synchronicity book. He talks about these things. But I agree. The trippy part is whether or not people will actually fully buy in and believe it, because people tend not to. I mean, I don't know how it feels for the universe. Maybe the universe is like pulling its hair out, but because like I already told you, see, how many times you need me to tell this to you, right? But it is like that. Like the experience happens, and then human beings as we are, we forget about it in this strange way. Even though it might be like, if you really stopped and fully thought about it, you'd be like, oh my God, this is highly unlikely, and this means something. But for the most part, people will probably just like, it'll make an impact for a short time or whatever, and then probably just disappears from it.
And then we get lulled to sleep by the mundaneities.
I have to say, I think it's true.
Yeah.
And especially, and that we can talk about this maybe as more as we go along in the next episode even, but especially where, I mean, the universe is talking loud, and oh, I don't know, it conflicts with your own ideas about things, or especially because we'll get to it next episode, I suppose, in a way. But like a lot of times what's happening is like these archetypal figures don't necessarily like our mundane ideas.
No,
they're not necessarily into them.
No.
So we'll continue on when we get to it next episode, but that's probably where we'll pick up.
Yeah.
Because it raises an interesting question about this whole set of exercises. But I suppose that's it. Anything else you want to do before we, seems like an episode?
Yeah, no, I mean, for people, when you get response from your environment, take heed. It doesn't happen often, and it's there for a reason. So I don't know what that reason is, but even if you can't figure the reason out per se, and sometimes I think the reason doesn't matter that much, it helps to show you things. It helps to be a reminder that we're not limited to the reality that we perceive on a daily basis.
Well, at the very least in Jung, and I think this is true, these are the moments where something important is happening.
Sure.
Something important is happening. So how many times do you want to get like get the slap in the face that something important is happening? And I guess maybe the thing before we totally go is, in thinking about this over the podcast over the past year, so I think about this in my life a lot. I like the idea of this kind of universe. Sometimes I forget about it, but I try not to. But I like the idea that the universe is like this.
Yes.
That's a weird thing to say, because is it like this or not? I don't know.
Right.
On some level, but the fact that you have a vision of a jaguar and then some rando dude gives you a giant stuffed jaguar, that seems like the universe does this thing. And Jung was, I suppose, open enough to recognize like there's something weird happening here. That's hard to know entirely what it means, but there's some kind of feedback loop happening.
Yeah.
Between our own experiences and what the universe will then like show to us back. And I suppose like I've had enough of this where I'm like, I trust this stuff and believe in it. Or at least I try to,
Right.
So anyways, but on top of that, it's also like, I like that idea. I like the idea of living in an interactive universe. I think that's great. I think that appeals to me somehow. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
It just, I mean, I like the idea.
Seems more fun.
It's a more fun universe.
That's right.
Yeah, that's much more fun than like, a universe that's like some materialist big dead universe that, whatever. Right. I don't believe in that universe.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, we did it. I think it's good, right?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. Any last stuff, or we're ready to roll?
We're ready to roll.
We're ready to roll. Okay, we get to think about these things.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Eric, well, as always, thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you.
Audience, thank you guys for listening. Some people have been rocking with us for a few years now, and some people just popped on yesterday. So whether you're a newbie or a OG, we appreciate the love and support. Thanks for making us one of your top podcasts in Spotify, if that's how you consume us. And if you're checking us out on Apple Podcasts, go ahead and leave us a review. It definitely helps out the show. If you're watching us on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, or don't comment or don't subscribe, but just like, that works also. We definitely, we appreciate all the feedback from everybody. If you want to hit us up, feel free to hit us up on Instagram, the Gin and Tantra Podcast, or hit us up via Gmail at ginandtantra@gmail.com. And if you happen to know us personally, then you could send us a text message and say, hey, that episode was terrible. Do a different one, whatever, we're down. We're here for it all. We like all the love. It definitely helps. As this is a labor of love, we so love to get it back. So from us to you, we appreciate it. For Eric, this is Daniel. We'll check you out on the next one. Peace.